Welcome to Amidon Planet. I'm your host, Joel Amidon. Thank you for joining me on this never-ending quest to learn how to teach better. Today on episode 99 of the podcast, we are going to talk about the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And joining me for that conversation is my friend Alex Crosby, who is Discipleship Pastor at The Orchard here in Oxford, Mississippi. And surprisingly relevant to this conversation, he's a Memphis Grizzlies fan. And we both are big fans of the NBA, and for some reason that keeps coming up in our conversations, and it's part of this conversation here. I'm not going to delay it too much. Don't want to rush through this. In a book about not hurrying, elimination of hurry, we don't want to rush, but I think this is a good conversation. It captures a lot of stuff that I might hit in this front part, so I'm not going to belabor it, but just one thing to know is this is a good book. This is a really good book, and I think in this day and age, I would highly recommend this book. And this happened to be a book that was at our church, and I'd heard about it a couple times. But just from a secular standpoint, this book gets at some pretty big ideas with regards to the way society is default kind of towards this idea of hurry, and even to thinking about another book I'm reading. Hopefully I get to talk about on the podcast, where it talks about wonder, and wonder is a way to love, is through wonder. And if you're in a hurry, it's really hard to wonder, right? And you think about it. When I think about wonder, I think about a kid at like the zoo or a museum or stuff. Like sometimes you're, as an adult, and when I'm going to a zoo or museum, I'm like, okay, I saw that. There's a lot of stuff to read here. I'm not going to read through that. Oh, there's a little thing you could touch. And like, maybe I touch it. Maybe I don't. Just keep moving. All right, look, there, yep, lizard. Yep, there's a lizard. There's, at the zoo, there's a lizard. There's a fish. There's another fish. There's a bunch of fish. Ooh, what a big fish. And keep moving. And versus, kids like, oh my gosh, look at that fish. Or look at that lizard. Look at the lizard's moving his head. And it's like, meanwhile, you think, oh, we got a lot of zoo to get through. Come on, kid. Versus this kid's wondering. This kid is in love with the world and like what the beautiful creations within it, and is sitting there and wondering. You can't rush that. And like that kid is demonstrating love towards the world, or even the wonder of like, how did I think about my own context of like, how did a kid come up with this, this idea in the classroom, or this response, and like to wonder at it, and to want to, stand in wonder of their brilliance, right? Because sometimes it's like different than what we expect, and that takes time, and you can't hurry that. And so I think there's something in this book for everybody. But so we're going to dive into it, and as always, you just know that Alex and I will not be able to communicate the whole value of the book, and even if we did, it would be from our perspective. In other words, if you like what you hear, get the book for yourself. Right now, the book, you can find it on bookshop.org, which is a website committed to helpful local independent bookstores thrive in the age of e-commerce. A link to bookshop.org can be found in the show notes for this episode. And any purchases that you can make. The link to those show notes is amidonplanet.com/episode 99, where your purchase will not only support the local booksellers, but also the production costs of the Amidon Planet podcast. All right, here we go. Let's just get into it. Here's my conversation with Alex Crosby on the book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. Alex Crosby, welcome to Amidon Planet. How are you?
I'm good, Joel. I'm good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Are you really? You can be honest.
I really am. Yeah, no, I legitimately am excited to be here.
Well, I've been thinking about trying to have you on the podcast ever since I was on sabbatical, and I kind of requisitioned an office at the church in order to to find a place away from my office here at the university to like do some work. And we had all sorts of great conversations. I think you're in the midst of your schoolwork at that time. You're getting your master's at that time, right?
I was, because I remember multiple conversations centered around like my engagement with the text material for my master's degree, of which you are like directly associated with, like the thinking of that and the critical thinking that you brought into it. I was like, man, I just want to vent about how I had to read 100 pages and write a paper on it, and how that, is a pain in my neck. And you were like, like evaluating it, and some good conversations.
Yeah.
Some good conversations.
I might have been talking about assessment strategies and whatnot. You're just like, man, I got to write a paper, and that's it. And that's all I really want to do. And that's okay. That's okay, Alex. Alex, can you give a little self introduction, like kind of where you grew up and all that good stuff and what you do now?
Yeah. So my name is Alex. I'm one of the pastors at the Orchard in Oxford. I've been on staff here for 7 years in a few different capacities. I'm discipleship pastor now, which puts me over small groups. I get to preach about once a month over some other ministries within our church and have some different impact around the church because of that. I've been married for over 9 years now. I'm going to be 10 in May. To my wife, Lindsay, who's a 4th grade teacher here in Oxford. We've got 2 kids, a 5-year-old daughter, a 2-year-old son. I went to Delta State University. That's where I got my undergrad from. That's where my wife and I met. That's right. Or Statesman, as they're properly known, I guess. And I grew up in Memphis. So, I went from Memphis to Cleveland, moved straight to Oxford the day we got married. Been here ever since. So we love it.
So that actually connects with when we first met. Do you remember that?
Yes, you were in my interview when I got my job to move to Oxford, correct?
Yeah.
So this interview that happened the day that I was set to move into my housing, like attached to the job that I was going to work, I had just an interview, I guess what was for red tape with the personnel committee, and you were in that interview.
Yeah. And then, so you worked for how long did you work for the Wesley Foundation?
Yeah, I worked for Ole Miss Wesley Foundation for 3 years as the associate director.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then it's like we recruited you and brought you over to the Orchard. There you go.
Yeah. I just started attending the Orchard and then got on staff part-time as the worship leader and then full-time as doing different things, and just kind of divulged from there as I finished seminary and got ordained and all the stuff, all right here.
I just remember you coming to do some music at the Orchard, and you had like the guitar that Marty McFly had at the end of Back to the Future. Kind of looked like that's like, that guy must be cool. He's got a cool looking guitar.
That red 335 just makes you look cool.
That's right.
Not the fact that it's like a knockoff and not the proper guitar that was in the movie,
Yeah.
I couldn't rock it like that. That's for sure.
That's right. So we're here to talk about a book that that was going to be actually a book that I heard about this summer at family camp at Okoboji. So we've talked about Okoboji a couple times on the podcast, and had the director of programs on to talk to us. But anyway, didn't need to go all that background. I'll put a link in the show notes if someone's really interested. But regardless, at family camp this summer, they talked about this book, and it's a cool book to look at. It's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And so it's a orange cover. It's like stands out, and it was like I actually wrote it down. Like, I want to get this book. Summer went on. Fun stuff in the summer, and then come to the fall here at the Orchard, and that was going to be the book that we were going to talk about, and it was available for purchased it immediately, and then here we go. And and read it quickly, and you said, wow, Joel, you remember what you said?
Yeah, I said you're really taking the elimination of hurry to heart by speed reading the book about slowing down.
Yeah. And also too, one other thing about your relationship our relationship was we're both big NBA fans. And so I actually thought that maybe an alternative title to the book could have been Grit and Grind, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Slow it down.
Slow it down.
In the mud.
Yeah.
Yeah. So growing up in Memphis, I'm a Memphis Grizzlies fan. It's the only professional sports team that I have like a hard drawn line of fandom to. Yes. So I'm a Braves fan, but I'm a Braves fan because I grew up watching the Braves on TBS because they were the team of the 90s. So if I were to pick an NFL team, it would just be like picking a team. which is not a real way to be a fan.
Right.
It feels like your fandom should be like passed down generation to generation, or you like went to the games or whatever. So I'm a Grizzlies fan because I'm from Memphis. So our conversations do center a lot around NBA. We've been to a couple NBA games together.
Yes.
It's been a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if this was strategically planned to be the day before the Bucks and the Grizz face off tomorrow night in another preseason game, a second preseason matchup.
At the Fifth Serve Forum.
Yeah. And making sure that it wasn't after, we show you how flawed Damian Lillard and Giannis are together.
All right, moving on to the book.
Sorry, came on too strong. Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. Like we've seen we've gone to a Grizzly game together, but we haven't seen a Grizzlies Bucks game together, which might be dangerous.
Well, we went to that. The last one we went to was the preseason game from last year when the Bucks and the Grizzlies played.
Oh yeah,
the Grayson Allen return game.
That was that was fine. We then went to the regular season one last year, and that was not good. That was not good. I think we lost by 22. And that was like after it was actually down by like 30 or 40. So yeah, that was not good. The people on the way out asked my son if he wanted to like dispose of his Chris Middleton jersey into a trash can, but they
probably didn't say it that nicely. That's the Midwestern way of saying
that's
that.
Right.
They would have said that in Milwaukee, but not in Memphis. They didn't say that.
Yeah. It was fun though. It's always fun. Anyway, so we're here to talk about John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. What was your introduction to this book? I talked about mine. Was at camp this summer. Yeah.
So it's funny that you have me on to talk about a book because you and I both talked about the fact that I'm not a big reader.
Yeah.
Meaning
so it's hard to have you on a podcast where we talk about books.
Yeah. Finally a book that I've read because I don't read that many in a year.
Well, you read a lot right now, just a lot of picture books probably right now. That's right.
Yes, I've read a bunch of Millie has started to read, so my 5-year-old is reading to me. It's quite the shift.
Fantastic.
I've gotten to see how the world like opens up through reading for a little kid. It's just been awesome. Anyways, I read this book. I want to say we did this book for another series in 2020, so fall of 2019. I think we did this book or a series based off of this book. And so I read it prior to that. And so I've known about it since then. And I've read it once a year since then. It's typically the book that I read in between Christmas and New Year's. And that's most of the like downtime that I have to be able to read, whether I'm at family or sitting in a deer stand or something like that in those, that random week where nothing really happens. It's a book that I like to read to kind of set my year, set the pace, remind me of some things. I'll be honest. I don't read every word every year, but I get the thing for the whole year. So, yeah.
Well, and as a book too, it's like conversational in the way it's written. Like it's almost like you're getting John Mark Comer kind of talking to you in a like, kind of like asking you questions and a little bit at the same time. But it's like, and even in the way the words are even structured, it doesn't look like a traditional book either.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it feel approachable, especially to somebody who's not a massive reader. Like I've said, that like lines are double spaced, and it's like spaced out enough to where he'll say one thing 4 different times and use like 12 lines to say it, and it's just because it's like you were listening to somebody say it in conversation, or you were listening to somebody say it on a podcast or something like that.
Yeah. And even then it's kind of like taking the root of the book, and it would be weird if it was like single space with very small words and like,
just compacting all the information into fewest pages as possible.
Exactly.
But that, I guess that does lend itself to you being able to read it faster because it is spaced out that way. So a veteran reader like yourself.
Well, yeah. And again, there's some good stuff in here. So there's some things that smack you in the face, and there's some lessons to be learned. And like you said, you engage with it on a yearly basis in order to like reset and think about. So it's teaching you something, and then thinking about like, well, what are the lessons that we could learn for teaching? Because that's what we're here for, is learning how to teach better. So
awesome.
And so there's a curveball question, but I'm throwing it at you, given that you exposed it to the book. So in the beginning, he kind of just talks about, hey, we're hurrying up, like, no doubt, like we're hurrying up. Mm-hmm. Any of those things that stood out from you in the first part of the book, where it talks about like going from, just, when we were no clocks or anything, we're just living life according to the rhythms of the sun going up and sun going down and the seasons and everything, just like being completely tuned in that way to where we are now. He puts a number of stats or a number of different, like even mile markers along that path. Anything that from that story that kind of stood out to you and in how we're being hurried up as a society?
I think I think it is in this book where he mentions that they did a study back in the 80s that because of all the automation that was happening, because of the robots, because of the way that factories were being made more efficient to be more productive and to use less staffing, to have less people on the floor of a factory.
Yeah.
And robots, computers being able to do more and more, that they estimated that we'd be working like 20 hours a week.
Yeah.
By the year 2000.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that that brings to light how much we can miss what hurry does to our world. That we think in our American culture that by speeding up, by being more efficient, by being more productive, that we're actually getting the best out of ourselves. When in reality, the opposite is actually happening. That we're spreading ourselves too thin. We're working into our margins. We've got more burnout than ever before. We've got less joy. And really, if you've got no exposure to this book at all, that's really the vein behind it, is that John Mark Comer, the author, is trying to illuminate to us that hurry, as he talks about, he has this quote. The title of the book comes from this quote on page 19. I've got to read it because I don't have it memorized. But he says, this is a quote from Dallas Willard, and this is where he gets the idea for the book. He says, so like, what must I do to be the me that I want to be, is the question that John Mark Comer asked to Dallas Willard. And he says, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And it's kind of like a pause. And he goes, okay, that's good. He writes that down. He said, okay, what else? Like, what else do I need to do to become, the me that I want to be? And then Dallas Willard says, there's nothing else. Hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And it's this idea that the pace of life that Jesus calls us to as his followers, to live counterculturally to our world, that says productivity and efficiency, those are king, those are rule. You should work. You should always be on call, even if your job doesn't have this title of on call. You should always be on or be able to turn it on. You need to always be within reach, those kinds of things. That the pace that Jesus calls us to is antithetical to that. It is completely opposite, and we cannot follow the pace of Jesus if we are continually caught up in the pace of this world. And so John Mark, he supplies that, like, in order to follow Jesus well with every aspect of our lives, we must ruthlessly eliminate hurry.
Yeah, and love that. Thank you for recounting that story. But then thinking about, that question, what do I need to do to become the me I want to be? Like, I always think about with, so I teach teachers, and I want the teachers to be the teachers that they were designed to be, right? Not just to act like a teacher, but to become the teacher they were meant to be, right? With their students. And so thinking about, all the different things that are put on them, like what they think they need to do to act like a teacher rather than being the teacher. And so, same thing here where, it's the, like, oh, I need to do all these different projects and whatever because the other person across the hall does it, that all this stuff that they add on to this position versus, like, the idea of slowing down, building relationships. Like, you think about some of the most important things, most effective things in being a teacher doesn't have to do with maybe some of that stuff that you're hurrying through to get done. So
yeah, for sure. And I think it comes out of a place of confidence when we slow down and when we like find our voice. That's some of the language that we use when we talk about preaching and when we're teaching, like our preaching cohort. We're taking people who feel like they have a call to preach but have never preached before, that we encourage them to find their voice, so that like you're not just a copy of whatever your favorite preacher sounds like, your context, your pacing, your rhythm, the words that you use, the educational background you have, the demographic of your church, where you are in the world is all totally different. And so you can watch, a preacher preach in Atlanta and watch somebody preach in New York and then in, Montana, and they're all going to be completely and totally different. And that's them finding their voice in their normal context. And so you have to feel fairly confident in who you are, though, as a communicator. When it comes to standing in a room full of, no matter what age it is, whether it's adults, whether it's kids, no matter what, you've got to feel confident in who you are and who you've like the gifts that you've been given and like the calling placed upon your life to be able to get up there and not just try to like put on the show of a successful teacher because this is what successful teachers should do, or I heard a preacher once do this, so that means I need to do this as a preacher. You can only carry so much confidence into those types of things if it's not your own voice.
Yeah. Well, it got me thinking about something that you would think about preaching. Like there's a book by Andy Stanley, I think it's called Deep and Wide. It's about giving messages, and I might be a different book. But anyway, he has a book about delivering messages, and it's a parable. It's first, and then he kind of explains some of the thinking behind it in the second half of the book. But regardless, he talks about like this pastor is given a message like the seven things you need to remember about relationships, and the guy says, and this is one sermon, 7 things, huh? Are they really important? Oh yeah, each of them is important. Like, why isn't it then one each week rather than trying to shove them all into a single message? And you think about like what you're talking about with confidence, how confident you have to be with each one of those. Can they each stand on their own? If they can, well, then are they that important? Right. So if they were that important to like building relationships, if that's what it was, then you have to be thinking like, well, now I would narrow them down to what's really important if it is going to be one a week, right? Because I'm slowing down and have that, like you said, the confidence.
Because we should value the retention rate of that, right? If I'm going to say all 7 of those, you might walk away with 2 of them, but if I take 7 weeks to go through all of them, hopefully at the end of 7 weeks, if I've built it up, if I've taught it correctly, you'll be able to retain those. It's not just about like the massive information that you're able to intake. It's what you're actually able to retain. And when it comes to preaching, like the retention of the sermon, that's what it can lead to life change. It's not just like, hey, here's how to be healthier or wealthier or wiser or whatever the, like self-help things are. Yeah.
I use that learning to like, for class I teach now, it's about teaching these elementary teachers how to teach mathematics. And there's one objective: to identify, adapt, use, and refine messy task lessons, which is like engaging kids in problem solving. If we can do that, all the other stuff, the content, the, classroom, all that other stuff will fall into place if we can just focus in on that one thing.
Yeah.
All right. So we kind of already gotten into this, but like, what are some things when you think about learning from this book, learning how to teach better? And we talk about, we talked about teaching, like you teach on a stage sometimes. We given a message. You and I are both parents, so we're teaching to our kids. You have younger kids, I have older kids. But we also are, constantly doing other things with with people. Anytime we're trying to help develop relationship with something, where we're facilitating that developing of a relationship, I think we're engaging in teaching. So what are some lessons we can learn, or things that you've taken from this that might provide some influence there?
So as it pertains to me as a father teacher or a teaching father, one of the things that I hope that my kids will notice about me is my pace of life. I tend to be an overachiever. I tend to be a high output kind of employee. I, you know, I am bent towards working more hours than less hours, just naturally. And I try to like cram in as much great work as I can into those hours. So it's very easy for me to lend towards like speeding up towards high efficiency, high output, those types of things. But I have worked intentionally over the years to slow down, and slow down, especially when it comes to moments that don't need to be in a hurry, so that I can parallel them with the moments that do need to be in a hurry. I've tried to do the same thing with my volume and my tone with my kids, that there are moments where I don't need to speak loudly, or to speak quickly. But there are moments like my son chasing a ball out into the street, where I do need to speak loudly and I do need to speak quickly. There are moments where, we're walking from the front door to the truck and little legs, are moving very slowly. We don't need to move in a hurry because we're not in a hurry. But if we were in a situation where we needed to be in a hurry, that we could, because like they know the normal pace, they know the normal volume, and hopefully it can be kind of paralleled and contrasted with the moments when it is necessary. And so I hope that they pick up, because I know that kids pick up on all of the idiosyncrasies that the authority figure has at that moment. So picking up emotionally what's going on, they're picking up, the feeling in the room, even not just like what words are being said, but how the words are being said. And so I hope that my pacing, not just in word, but in deed, that they see a very marked difference between their dad when it's a Sunday morning and church is going on, and dad's walking around church and meeting people and, doing all the things that I need to do because I'm at work. Like this is my work, and they are there for church, but they also are seeing me work. That they recognize a marked difference between that and a marked difference when dad is like on his Sabbath day and it's a Thursday night, Friday, and we're hanging out and we're in no rush. I hope that the moments of slowing are very intentional and methodical and noticed.
Did you, when you read the book and you looked at, so like something I'm pointing out right here is that hurry sickness inventory?
Yes.
Like when you look at that, and when things that you're saying, like, hey, the kids will notice things, like they can see, they can sense. And you think about some of these things where there's an inventory in the book about, what is it, 10, 11 things, 10 things. And, just kind of gauging where you're at. So like with regards to irritability, hypersensitivity, restlessness, workaholism, or just nonstop activity, emotional numbness, out of order priorities, lack of care for your body, escapist behaviors, slippage of spiritual disciplines, and isolation. Like, thinking about how those things can creep in when you're trying to keep up with the pace, right? Of, like where you're not setting the pace is being set for you, where people keep taking from you, or you'll keep giving, however you want to put that. But I think about these things, and like even thinking about some of these things that my kids have noticed. I have a very receptive, my youngest is very receptive on things. And like, one time I just know he's like, Dad, can you smile? Like he asked me to smile. And I was like, oh my gosh, that broke my, I was like, shoot, am I just like walking around looking irritable because of, got the task list going on in my head and I'm trying to do too much rather than being present. Right. And,
yeah.
And I just, that just killed me. But I was like thinking about this list, and it's like, even with thinking about teaching specifically, like even number 10, the isolation, right? Like where, teachers that are trying to do so much, they just, close their door and they think, oh, I'll do it all myself because I'm too busy to even reach out and try to seek out some help for some other people there. Or out of order priorities where, they put something ahead of, something ahead of the other, where it's like, what, probably the best thing is for this kid to enjoy math class rather than them to complete this worksheet. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like, so.
It's the being present part that this is all like culminating in. It is we wage war on the hurry, because in the hurry, you're not able to be present for anything.
Right.
That if you're worried and you're rushing around all morning and you're short with your kids getting out the door because you've got this big meeting, I've had this experience that you wake up, you're stressed, you're thinking about the meeting, you're trying to get the kids out the door, you're trying to get them dropped off, you're stuck in traffic, you're still stressed about this meeting. It's all you can think about. You get in the meeting, and then all you can think about is like, gosh, I was a terrible father this morning.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, I forgot, like my daughter asked me for a water bottle on the way out and I totally forgot. Mm-hmm. And you miss what matters most, like in those moments. And the kids pick that up. The kids pick up that kind of pace, that kind of hurry when you drop them off and you kind of like, you're rushing them around all morning. And then all of a sudden, you've dropped them off and then they go into school feeling rushed. They're not prepared to learn. They're not prepared to, be shaped by the teacher. And then you pick them up after school and you're trying to rush home because you got to go by Kroger before you go to the house, because you got to get stuff for dinner before you go out to the ball fields. And, mm-hmm. and they gain this, it communicates that like what's going on outside this car is more important than what's going on inside this car. And like what's going on where we're going is better than where we are right now. Where we should always be trying to communicate to our kids that this right here is the most important thing. Like what's happening inside this car right now is most important.
Yeah, that's like really important. I mean, think about it, like when we're hurrying, we're basically saying like, almost like where we're at right now is not good enough.
Correct. Yeah. Where I want to be is where it's better. And whoever you're with, that's what it communicates. I mean, we've all been, like you've gone to the lunch appointment with your friend from college and you're trying to catch up, and the whole time they're like checking their phone, they're looking down, they're absent-minded. You don't feel important at all. And so, as it like brings itself into the classroom or brings itself into office hours and things like that, when people come to meet with you, to make them feel important, to make them feel like, they're worth the time, to do like individual instruction with, being present is like key priority.
Yeah. Well, I think about that. There's a book by Magdalene Lampert, Teaching with Problems and the Problems of Teaching. And she's going through like, you kind of get inside her head, like as she's going through and talking about a kid in this class is reasoning through this problem that she's had them thinking about individually, then with partners, and now they're talking about it as a whole class. And they're struggling with this problem, and people are sharing their thinking. And one move that I just remember when I was a young teacher that I read about is like, she didn't end the discussion because it was like a problem. She knew the answer. And she could have said like, hey, it's this. And, you guys did a good job of reasoning, because they did like all the different talk. But she's like, there's still something going on here. And she wasn't going to hurry to like, put a cap on it and be like, because we got to do another one tomorrow. She's like, we're going to come back to this. We're going to leave it up. Right. And honoring, because it like where they were at with their thinking was the most important thing. And it's like what it said. I mean, think about what that said to those kids. Like, hey, my ideas about math are pretty valuable, that my teacher wants me to bring it back tomorrow, or wants to make sure too that my notes are good so I can come back and represent what I was thinking tomorrow. Like, I mean, think about the value that puts on that kid, or, in their participation within a math classroom versus, nope, the most important thing is the bell. Most important thing is my lesson plan for tomorrow. Like all these different things you could have said that to rush to is going to be more important than that kid's thinking. I think it's just powerful.
I mean, I tell our small group leaders all the time, one of the parts of my job is that I assist in writing like small group material for our groups as they meet. And I tell them all the time that I care much more about your community than you finish the curriculum.
Yeah.
I care more about the people than the program. So like, don't finish the program, or like don't ask all the questions if you need to stop and you need to care for people, and you need, like, you'll get stuck on one question. And Because that's what matters more than, just finishing the curriculum.
And that's why my dad was an alcoholic. All right, on to question 2. Like
exactly. Like, just like, well, we got to keep going because we said we'd meet an hour and a half and we've got to get through all these questions. And,
right. And that goes back to these hurry sickness things, like, out of order priorities, right? And thinking about the emotional numbness, right? Just like, hey, I to be a good, youth or community leader, I need to like pop through these questions quickly versus actually like engaging with each other. So,
yep. And what's tough is when when this like desire to slow things down, like is in immediate opposition to what is required of us or what is like necessary for our jobs. Cause like being the spouse to a 4th grade teacher, like I don't know anything about the classroom. I will be first to admit that. She is called to that. She's a wonderful teacher. But I hear her talk about benchmarks and, we've got these certain steps and we've got to hit these certain things and teach, these particular things before state tests. Right. And I know that like those are particular things that you have to get to, but in math, like many other subjects, it's all building blocks. It's all building upon your ability to do the thing before it. So if we're speeding through and you just, you're having trouble adding fractions, when we get to the next thing that requires you to add fractions first, then you're going to be behind. And it's not because, you're not able to do it. You just don't have the time to, click over in your brain to make it happen. So if we're able to slow down, it actually makes the building blocks next all that much easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was like thinking about the next thing I wanted to bring was like this idea of like limitations, right? Yeah, there are limited times, there are limited things, but then still that makes sure like we understand what are our priorities, what are we going to put forward. So in the later part of the book, they talk about just all the the different things. There was it was like something about guilt about your media.
It's talking in a digital detox.
Yeah. But it was like something, it was a good term. Oh, I couldn't remember, but it was like basically like feeling stressed because you haven't watched whatever insert name of show here. Right. Like, oh, are you caught up on Alex? You caught up on Yellowstone? Are you caught up on this? Like, oh man, I have so much to watch and it's just like, are you serious? Like, just to come to the conclusion that there are limitations and like, one, do you need to be watching it in itself? But two, like, what are the limitations that are already built into our lives? What are the constraints that we have? And like, that's how we're designed. We're designed with constraints. We're designed with a body that's not going to last forever. Right. We're designed with minds that only can hold on to some things, or even to our giftings. Like, we both have different, people have different giftings and what they can and cannot do. Like, so I was just bragging that I went and saw Drew Holcomb and the Neighbors last night. And he actually has a book or a song about this. It's from Dragons. It's called You Want What You Can't Have. And it's just basically like, say all these things that you could do in your life, but there's probably not going to do it. Like, I'm not going to go climb all 7 mountains of the world. Right. It's not going to happen. Like it's, if I did choose to do that, well, then I'm choosing to not do a bunch of other stuff. Right. And so like, there's limitations to what we can and cannot do, and to like embrace them. Like, they're there for a reason, right? They're it's not like that you're a failure. It's just like, there just are limitations to things.
Definitely. And I think, those limitations, we have to learn what the like healthy answer is for each of us as individuals for that. So for certain individuals, that means, no social media or limited interaction with social media. For others, it means, that they're not, like the way that they interact with movies and TV shows and that kind of media is just going to be limited. For some, it's sports, like just your engagement and how much you care about whether or not, your team wins this game, just like how emotionally attached you are to it. It's different for every single person, and it's a different thing for every single person, but it is those limits that of like the the could do, the would do, the should do lists just add up. And if we've got our priorities out of whack, the should do's are all kind of jostled around. And as a family, like when it comes to family and work and personal health and like personal well-being and stuff, there's a lot of could do's. I think John Mark would say that is where this discipline of Sabbath comes in. So he's proposing these spiritual disciplines like silence and solitude, like Sabbath, as like intentional ways of living in opposition to the pace of the world. And one of those is Sabbath. So Sabbath is an old word. It comes from a Hebrew word called Shabbat, which is to stop, to rest, to take joy. And it's on a Sabbath day. So the idea of Sabbath comes from the creation story, where on the seventh day, this is from Genesis, it says that God rested. He didn't make anything on the seventh day, except that he made Sabbath. He made this model for us to follow, that we are working creatures. We're meant to work. God gave us work to do in the garden. God has given work to do. God has given man work to do all throughout our time here on earth. But he has also given us rest to do, and he's given us this model. We are not meant to work 7 days a week. And for those of us trying to work 80 hours in a week to try to have some semblance of personal, physical health, some semblance of like healthy family, some good, healthy relationships among friends, it's just not possible. And what's so tough is that to hear, oh, it's actually the answer to my problems is actually to stop. When American culture would just desire that we work harder, know that you need to sleep less, you're sleeping too much, or you need to like be more productive on your commute. You've got to capitalize on these hours that you're not actually doing anything, figure out this side hustle that's passive income, all these kinds of things that are all geared at like maximizing your time. When the way of Jesus is no, every 7 days, every 6 days, have a period of 24 hours where you just stop and you rest. And the list of could do, would do, should do, ought to do, all that goes out the window, and it becomes a list of like, I get to do this. If it is like catching up on like the latest episode of Yellowstone, like you said, like throw that in the get to category. Or if it's, man, I've been trying to finish this book now for months and I just don't ever have the time. Like, throw that in the get to category. Do it on your Sabbath. It's a beautiful day. Like, go out and read at the park. Go play disc golf. Like, go work in your garden. It's those types of things that offer you this satisfaction of fulfillment that the world continually like dangles the carrot in front of your face, like as you're on the treadmill of like, oh, satisfaction is in productivity and efficiency, and you just never get to it.
Yeah, I wonder like the so like later on, they did talk about with that TV time, they talked about the calculations on how much time you'd spend watching TV and whatever. And I remember like the things that, if you thought about it, like how much time do you want to spend on TV or on something like you or playing guitar or like, those get to sort of things versus like I'm doing something to hurry through it. Like, and it's like something that's or even something I'm doing to escape. Like we're kind of talking about before, like, escape things like social media and whatever. Like if you think about it as something I get to do or something like, I want to do, versus something I'm doing as like an unhealthy behavior, right? Like reversing that, or even to thinking about it from a classroom teacher perspective. How much time do you want to spend on grading versus how much time do you want to spend building relationships with your students? And it's like, wow, but there's so much to grade. Like, well, who makes all the stuff to grade? Like, so in some cases you do have some agency, like obviously there's some things you need to do, but like, what do you need to do to show like that a kid has demonstrated understanding versus like, does everything that go in and come out have to be something that's graded, or is it something that's done just in an exercise of learning? And maybe you're looking at it to see how did they demonstrate their understanding, or maybe it was something that you want to grab and show as like, hey, you can do this. Look at this. Like you're demonstrating competence. But like, I just remember, when I was a young teacher, I was like, I couldn't spend all that time doing the grading. And also too, I thought, well, who's getting more benefit? I'm learning what their mistakes are. I want them to learn what their mistakes are. And I would actually have my students do a lot of their grading themselves. We'd go over it and say like, hey, where did you get something wrong? How could you make it better? Those sorts of things where it was like this is for you in order to get better at math. And I was dealing with high schoolers. So like, young adults that could handle possibly those situations, but because it became like, if I have more time to have better relationships with my students, I'm gonna be a better teacher of them. And then then the grading, it would suck up that time that I could use to do those efforts. So it was just like that reallocation.
It's the time allocation, because grading them yourself is quick. Like if you're just, all the answers and you're grading 20 papers, they're all the same, they all look the same, you can circle the right answer, you can get through that quickly, as compared to taking time out of class, handing the papers back out, going over the answers, slowing things down, asking how you got it wrong, what you could do differently, where did you mess up, what was your mistake, how'd you learn to fix that. That all takes a lot more time. And it goes, it's the same thing we're talking about, that like we want to hurry through that. We want to, communicate hurry and pace subconsciously, where the other way communicates that it matters more that you learn than that we move on to the next thing.
Yeah. What else? Anything else that popped to you that you wanted to bring up with regards to thinking about learnings to practice with regards to your teaching?
I love books that talk about Jesus as a teacher, and this book does a great job highlighting that if you were a first century Jewish person living in the ancient Near East in the days of Jesus, that you would have seen Jesus, you would have called him most likely rabbi, which just means teacher. That's what he would have been. That's what he would have been taught, told. Rabbis had their work, like their task of teaching. And then they had their people, their apprentices, the people that they taught, the people that followed them and that they guided along and taught in order for them to one day become rabbis to teach. And so I love examining the way that Jesus taught and the way that he lived his life in comparison to his teachings. So one of the phrases that comes out of this book is that Jesus was busy, but Jesus was never in a hurry. And if you look through the life of Jesus, if you look through like even some of the parables are like 2 verses, very easy, short, like phrases that make you think, for days on them afterwards. Some of them are very lengthy and wordy, and it's like the longest way to say something.
Yeah.
You're like, man, he was just trying to reach like a word count on his paper here to like fill out this parable. And some of those parables, it's all because of like he wasn't concerned with how much time it took for you to understand something. He wasn't concerned with how much time it took him to get from here to there, to walk from place to place, to like wherever he was needed. He would get there when he needed to get there. Well, and some of that, go ahead.
I was going to say just to point at that was, there's stories of someone coming to him like, Jesus, come quick. This person's dying. They need you. And he like waited around for 2 days. Like he didn't leave.
Right.
And then eventually he and it's just like, yeah, he was on his time. And it's just kind of amazing. Like, he's not a hypocrite. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And it comes back to the confidence thing that I was talking about, like his assurity of who he was and what his calling was. Now it's a little different. He was the Son of God. He's perfectly divine and perfect in every way. That can add who you are, some surety of character, right? That he had of himself. That I understand that we as humans can't carry into our everyday lives. But he was so confident in who he was and what his task was, in the way in which to carry out that task, his Father's will, to do what his Father asked him to do, that he was in no rush to complete that task. It was the task over the time, for sure.
Yeah. And that's one of the there's 3 goals in there: to be with Jesus, to become like Jesus, and to do what he would do if he were you. Right. And so like having those sorts of, that confidence in who you are, and what you're being called to do. I mean, that does take some self-reflection, but then that involves some of these other things that, he goes in the second half of the book talking about the 4 kind of spiritual practices of silence and solitude, Sabbath, simplicity, and slowing. And he goes into, and obviously we always say it in the podcast, we're not cover the whole book, but there's a lot of things that you could get at, and you've already talked about Sabbath, but is there anything else that stuck to you with those 4 practices that just want to make sure to highlight?
In the like slowing category, one of the things that I can live in my phone. I'm of the generation that I've had a phone my whole adult life. I don't know like high school and beyond without social media. It's just ingrained in who I am and everybody in my generation. And so I can tend to live in my phone if I'm not careful. And I have tried to embrace the moments where boredom is like calling. I've tried to like answer the phone to boredom, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I can remember, I've tried to communicate to my kids that like there was a time when we'd be on a road trip with our family, and there was no DVD player in the car, and there was no tablet to play with. And we just had to sit there and look out the window and pretend we were in a music video as whatever music was playing, and like the rain beat down on the window, and it was real sad. And we were bored. And being bored is okay. It's good for your brain. It like cultivates some creativity, at least within my own brain, that like I'm allowed to process through some things silently. I'm allowed to think outside the box on a problem when I'm not living in my phone. And so like sitting in the doctor's office, waiting in line at the pickup for kids pickup or something like that, waiting on a meeting to start, trying my best not to live into my phone. Embracing the boredom that kind of comes with life, looking around, eyes up.
Yeah. Engaging, being in the moment, all that stuff. Like been trying to do things where you can't be on a phone, like playing ping pong. Can't be on a phone, playing ping pong, playing catch, like those sorts of things, riding a bike. I've been doing that a lot lately. But having this silence and solitude too. Like I've done that a lot where I'm trying to get better at that, because too often I'm filling everything with something, like having something going on. And just, from a teaching perspective, just allowing kids time to process, like, wait time and stuff. Like, it is interesting if you look at some studies where, like, look at how long if teachers are asking an in-depth question where you need kids to think, like, how often do we actually give them the time to actually do that? Like, you've asked an awesome question and you're giving them less than 3 seconds to come up with a response. Like, to actually slow down, give some silence, give some alone time to think about it. And actually then, because then you're actually honoring them and their thoughts too, as well, by giving time for such things. And I know that that's not necessarily the point of that, but I mean, just when we're talking about hurrying, like there is something there with regards to giving, honoring that time. Right.
Definitely.
So,
Definitely.
Anything you have done differently, or, given your yearly, recalculations with the book, anything you've done, to either change something or something you want to do in the future now that you revisit again, given what you've read?
So I am off social media. I've found that it's just better for my mental health if I do that. And it's one of the things that allows me to embrace boredom and not feel the draw towards my phone. Like, the only real thing that I can do on my phone now is check my fantasy football team. And like, you can only do that so many times in a day. So like, I don't have anything on my phone like that. It helps me stay a little more present as a parent, as a pastor, as a husband. So that's one of the changes that I made. And then this book comes with a number of like challenges in the slowing category of like get in the long line at the grocery store, or get behind the slow car, come to a complete stop at the red light or at the stop sign. It's those kinds of practices that I've tried to fully embrace, so that I can be more present there, so that I can be present with what's going on in the car and not rushing around, not listening to my 2-year-old babble on in the back seat, because he won't always do that. And so I want to embrace that when it happens. And getting in the long line at the grocery store has led to me seeing people that I wouldn't have seen had I just done a quick checkout and not waited in line. Getting to visit with them, all of those kinds of things are direct byproducts of having read this book.
Yeah, I love. I don't think my kids like going to the grocery store with me because I do like to look around, see who I know.
Dude, I look up and down every single aisle searching for people that I know. I'm an extrovert, and so I enjoy going to the grocery store for that very reason.
Yeah. Hey, what kind of pinto beans you get in there? Hey, look at that. Nice. Organic. Wow. Nice. Fancy. Critical. I mean, so what might be the critical side of this? So what would be the major critique of this book? I don't know. You got any thoughts on that?
I do. So when we were preaching through this book, one of the things, or not preaching through this book, when we were preaching through the Bible through the lens of these 4 spiritual disciplines and using this book as a resource.
Yeah.
One of the things that we continually bumped into, or I continually bumped into in my preparation, was that this feels much more like a park map than a grocery list. And that's going to take some explaining. So I think of a grocery list. We want to walk in with a problem and we want to walk out with a solution. So the problem is I have all these things that I need. This list is a map telling me where I need to go throughout the store. And I go up and down the aisles. I go get all the things that I need. I know the process here. I walk out, problem solved. I've got all that I need. Cut and dry. I'll be back again next week. Kind of relationship. And that's what we want. And that's not what this is. Because so much about this is, here's a map of all the things that you can do. You can do any of them that you want to do, as it is helpful for you to go and do. And so I think if you were to look at a heat map of just a public park, the usage points would center probably around the entrances, maybe around the walking track. Nobody's walking out into the middle of the field where there's no purpose to walk out to. Nobody's going to the other side of the lake because there's not a clarified trail for you to go over there. Everybody's kind of staying where they need to. And so it's a lot harder to just be given this open field, this free reign for us to go and find the thing that we need, rather than here's a problem, here's a solution, here's a transaction. I'll see you again next week. Rather than hey, go spend some time in the park because it's good for your soul. A lot of us are what? I don't have anything to complete or to finish, or can I have a fidget or toy or something to no, it's just go and enjoy an hour in the park and go hang out. So I hope that makes sense.
No,
that was the best illustration I could come up with.
No, it kind of sounds the difference between our master's program here and our PhD. Master's programs are usually you take these courses and hey, here's your master's, versus the PhD is you have to come up with your dissertation. Well, what should my dissertation be? It's a great question. You got to figure that out.
That's what we're asking you.
That's what we're asking you. Yeah. And just want to make sure, honor your time, but want to make sure this question gets asked. You're a teacher. You're a teacher of kids through your parenting, but you're also a teacher at the orchard. So what's the best thing you have learned? You can go at either venue or both if you want. What is the best thing you have learned to help you teach better?
This has nothing to do with the book because I learned this pretty early on. It's going to sound like it is, to slow down when I'm speaking. I had a tendency, especially in preaching, to get up and because of nerves, because of excitement, because of being in front of that many people, that I would speed up the way that I would talk, that my pacing, my flow, everything would go much faster, and I would just get worked up, and I'd ask a question and I had no pause, and there'd be no sitting in silence, because silence was awkward and I was afraid I was going to fill it with an and all these things, to where now I'm a little more slow. I try to slow down when I get on stage. I try to slow down when I'm really trying to get my child to understand something. We're working with a 5-year-old's time attention span. So we're not able to have long, drawn out conversations. They are very short. But I try to be very careful and methodical with my words. And it's proven to be beneficial for retention's sake.
Yeah. I used to similar thing, but then I would not finish my sentences. I would go until if somebody, I was talking to you and you started nodding, I would just move on to the next sentence. And when you're doing a podcast, you got to finish your sentences. And so you need to slow down.
That is one of the important things.
Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise you just have this guy has been talking for 30 minutes and has never completed a thought. That's great. So awesome. Anything to promote?
Man, Jesus is good. Jesus is king. He'll change your life if you let him. I'm like I said, I'm not on social media. I'm not writing any books anytime soon.
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed, and every year, this year I just saw the rankings came out. Jesus, number 1 teacher. There he is.
Hey.
Yeah. Again. It's I keep talking the examples that we come up with sometimes in educational research is man, you should work in small groups. You should get relationships matter. And hey, use context in your teaching. I'm yep. You
mean all the things that Jesus did?
Yeah. All the things Jesus did. Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Well, Alex, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being willing to talk about this book, and look forward to.
Thanks for having me.
Looking forward to talking some NBA probably in the near future when it kicks off.
Maybe after tomorrow night's game.
There you go. All right. Thanks, Alex.
See ya.
All right. There's my conversation with Alex on the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. So thankful that he was willing to join me for this conversation. And just one thing before we go, I just want to mention, I mentioned a book, but I didn't mention what the book was. The book is called about wonder, and you can't rush wonder, and wonder is an act of love. And the book is called See No Stranger, a memoir and manifesto of revolutionary love. I'm in the midst of that book. It's by Valerie Kaur, Kaur. And I'm in the midst of that book. I'll put a link in the show notes to it. But man, every page I'm kind of loving, and excited to hopefully in the future get a chance to talk about it on the podcast. So anyway, just want to make sure that book's out there in case someone's out there looking for something like that. Just some deep stuff happening in that book. Anyway, but this book too, the John Mark Comer's book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, still wrestling some of the ideas and even some of the exercise in the back of the book, and thinking about what it means to engage in hurry sickness and just kind of trying to slow down a little bit has been good. Just trying to go on the speed limit and, pausing, being present, listening, fully listening before I try to respond in a situation, or getting off of social media and trying to be more present in spaces. And so still work in progress, right? Aren't we all? And I kind of like Alex's approach of wanting to review this book in the new year. It's probably a good idea. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Show notes can be found at amazonplanet.com/episode 99. If you're looking for ways to support the podcast, here's some things you could do. 1, listen to the podcast. If you're already here, you probably did. But listen to each episode. Ask a question, right? You can submit a question, comment, or suggestion to joel@amazonplanet.com. That just shows me people listening and that people are paying attention or have certain things that maybe I'm missing, how I can make the podcast better, or even suggestions about books. I think the book that I just mentioned about the See No Stranger book, that was suggested to me by a good friend, Jen Wolf. And so always looking for good content to feature on the podcast. But in other ways you can support, again, listening to the podcast, subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, rating or reviewing it, if those options are available, wherever you get your podcast. And then if you hear of someone that or if you hear something that you think someone could benefit from that's in your life, just hit there's a little like box with an arrow, hit that, and it'll email them a link to it. And you're like, well, do they have Spotify or do they have this? Whatever, just send it to them. And at a minimum, it just shows that even if they never listen to the podcast, it just shows that you're invested in someone's life. Like, hey, I heard this and made me think of you, right? I heard this and it made me think of you. And it's just like that somewhere out there that someone is thinking of you is kind of a cool thing, right? It's a way, it's like a little message, like sending them a postcard, even though we don't do postcards much anymore. But it's a way of showing that you care about someone. So anyway, that's something you can do, not only to show someone that you care about them, but then it also helps others that are looking for similar content find it as well. So listen, subscribe, rate, review, and share, which will allow, again, more people to find similar content to this. We keep going up in our listens and just trying to always get better. So thank you for those of you that are out there supporting us. Another way you can do it is subscribe to the Abbott on Planet download, which contains teaching resources and updates from Abbott on Planet. Going to start sending those out a little bit more regular in the near future. I know I keep saying that, but really, maybe the post 100 episodes it's really going to get fired up there. So anyway, finally, thank you for spending time on Abbott on Planet. Thanks to Alex Crosby for sharing his time and expertise. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there learning to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you've been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.